This scatter plot encodes two quantitative columns using x and y. We can represent an additional column that's categorical using color. Looking back at our marks and channels example, we have x position, y position, size, and length. Those are all really good at encoding quantitative columns. Color, which is good at encoding a categorical column, at least in the way it's used here, which is pretty much hue. It's differing in hue. And we've also got shape. Shape is another channel that's very good at encoding categorical columns. I'd like to show you how we can do that with D3 by modifying this scatter plot to use shape instead of color to represent these different species. I'll start by forking this example, and I'll call it scatter plot with shape. Here's where we build up our color scale, which is an instance of D3 scale ordinal, which is a one-to-one mapping from values in the domain to values in the range, kind of like a dictionary or a JavaScript object. To use this shape channel, I think it still makes sense to use D3 scale ordinal, but the range, instead of being colors, will be shapes. Let's quickly review how these shapes were made in this example. These shapes here were rendered with this code right here. We import symbol from D3 and use that to create a symbol generator. We create a bunch of path elements. We use transform translate to position them, and then we set the D attribute based on our symbol generator. The shape is actually set right here with the dot type, which type of symbol it is. Symbols fill is imported from D3, and much like scheme category 10, it is an array of things, namely symbol types, that we can pass into dot type. And finally, we set the size to a constant value and then invoke this symbol generator, which generates the SVG path string that we can use for the D attribute. And let me quickly show you what that looks like. Here are the various paths, and the D attribute looks like a bunch of gibberish, but it's one of those strings in the domain-specific language for SVG paths. So let's use this technique in our scatter plot. First, I'm going to import these symbol things from D3, and then I'll construct a symbol generator, and this only needs to happen once, I believe, so I'll do it outside of the function. And then I'll grab this whole block because this will actually replace our circles in the scatter plot. I'm going to comment out this entire block that renders the circles and drop this new block in here, and we're going to try to reconcile these two. The first thing I notice is that the domain paths for the axes disappear. Actually, one of them gets transformed into the symbol, which is kind of interesting. That indicates to me that we do need this mark class to make this selection a little more specific. So for all the paths, I will put the class of mark. The transform attribute is what positions these things, and we would like to position them the same way that the circles were positioned. So I think what I'll do is open this up into a function body and just write very explicit code where the x position gets x scale of x value of d, and the same for y. Alright, we compute x and y based on these scales, and then I'll drop that code we had earlier that generates the value, and this is what we want to return, but instead of these old values, we want x and y. That should do the trick, and I'm just curious how this would play out if we inline these rather than having variables. Would it be cleaner, or would it be more difficult to read? If we do that, we could use implicit return and drop all these parentheses. But then when we apply prettier, it ends up like this, with this awkward line break. And it's actually more lines. So a valiant attempt to make it more crisp, but ultimately I think this code is pretty clean. Alright, let's see what we've got here. This looks off. I mean, it kind of worked, but should be spread all across the screen. Inspecting the DOM, it looks okay. Let me make it a bit smaller, just so we can see what these symbols are. Okay, these are all the different symbols that we could possibly have. And I think what's going on here is that we're just running out of symbols because this code is not correct. We need to update this to use our scale. What this is doing is just taking the index of the data elements and grabbing the corresponding symbol out of symbols fill, and we're just running out of those. But anyway, this part is correct. So I'm going to drop this old code that renders the circles. And then I would like to change this color scale to a shape scale. And the range, instead of being scheme category 10, should be symbols fill. So I'll replace scheme category 10 with symbols fill. And this concludes the setup of our scale. Now we can use it to inform the type for our symbol. So instead of saying symbols fill at I, and we're not going to need I anymore, we can just say shape, and I'll define shape to be shape scale of shape value of D, but right now we have color value, so I'll use that for now just to see if it works. Oh, I got unexpected token. Oh, this was using implicit return, but now it's not, so I need to put these parentheses in. Now I get a reference error. Color scale is not defined. Well, where am I using color scale? Oh, for the legend. I'll just comment that out for now. Nothing is showing up, and I'm not sure why. Oh, this isn't being returned. So I just need to return. And there it is. All right. Beautiful. We've got different symbols. Okay, the core of this is working. Now we just have to clean it up and maybe add the legend. Okay, in our scatter plot, we are accepting color value and a bunch of color legend parameters. I'm going to change all of these to shape. Shape value, shape legend label, shape legend X, and shape legend Y. In the scatter plot itself, we should map over shape value instead of color value. And when we figure out what the shape is, we should use shape value. And then over in viz.js, when we invoke the scatter plot, we should specify shape value and also shape legend label. Okay, that still works. Now let's add the legend. Earlier I commented out this call to the color legend, but I'll bring it back and I'll change this to shape legend. And I'll use the Vim mode here. In Vim mode, I hit colon and then s/color/shape/G. That will replace all of those. And then I want to do the same for this import. And then I'll rename color legend to be shape legend. Change its export here. And then we change, actually through this whole file, we should change color to shape. So now all of our parameters have shape. Our class is shape. We've got shape legend G. But we are still appending circles where we really should be appending paths. And then we are setting the fill of these circles based on the scale, but really what we should be doing is selecting the path. R is no longer relevant. And then we should be setting the D attribute. Based on the shape scale, and we already figured this out in the scatter plot, we pretty much need the same logic. So I'll copy it and drop it here into our shape legend. All right, so we've got selection.selectPath.ettrd, and then shape is shape scale of shape value of D. But remember, this was from the scatter plot where D was one row. But here, D is not a row of data, but rather an element from the shape scale domain. So we don't need shape value here at all. And this is so small that I think I'll inline this and transition back to implicit return. Yeah, that looks pretty good. The only thing we're missing now is our symbol generator, which we can define at the top of the file, just like we did in the scatter plot. But for that, we need to import symbol from D3. I think that should do it, but it does not show up, so let's see what's going on. We have an error that says expected number for translate undefined undefined. Oh. So yeah, we're using shape legend X, which is coming from our options object, but is it being passed in? In our scatter plot, it accepts shape legend X and shape legend Y, but when we invoke the legend, yeah, that is being passed in. I wonder if it's being passed from the top, from viz.js. There it is. It's still color legend. So let me change that to shape legend X and shape legend Y. Now we're getting somewhere, but the shapes are still not there. Let's see what's going on. I'll inspect the element. Somehow our elements are paths with an S on the end. That's not right. In shapelegend.js, that was just a typo. It should be path. And there it is. It worked. All right, that's how you can use D3 to encode a categorical column using shape.